Hey, Steve, how you doing today?
Good, Eric.
Yeah, we're doing these awkward intros because now we're doing the live broadcast on the Facebook group while we're also recording the podcast. So they can see how fake we are when we start the podcast.
Yeah. There's really no smooth way to start a podcast. I've seen the countdowns, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
No, you don't say it. Didn't you watch Wayne's World? You go 5, 4, 3.
That's right. But that always messes me up. I like to hear it.
Yeah.
Something's missing if you don't say it.
Well, you know what I like to hear is the intro music. So let's roll that sweet intro music.
2, 3, 4. Yeah.
Welcome to the Rent Prep for Landlords podcast. And now your hosts, Stephen White and Eric Worrell.
Hey, Steve. How you doing?
Good, man. I just noticed I got top billing on that intro. How'd that happen? You're the one that created it. You were just so selfless that you were like, I'm going to give Steve top spot.
I know where my bread is buttered. You got to appease that Steve White bottomless pit ego.
Oh, right. Like I have to be at the top. Although I did notice it, so
yeah.
Kudos. Good job.
Well, thank you. So this is episode 202, as we mentioned before. And actually, this is a weird little side story, and I probably shouldn't share. But 202 is actually a number that I know pretty well. So my height, I'm like 6'5", 6'6". If you convert that into centimeters, is 202 centimeters. Okay. And the reason I know that is I got sick of people asking me how tall I was. So when people would ask me, I would throw on my worst British accent. And they say, like, I remember this one time I was in a bar, actually, and this woman came up to me and she goes, "Hey, did you know you're really tall?" And I was just like,
I never knew that.
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah, exactly. And I said, yeah, I do. She goes, "How tall are you?" Or she said, she asked, "How tall are you?" And I go, about 202. And she's like, "What?" And I'm like, "About 202 centimeters." She goes, "Where are you from?" We're in North Buffalo. There's never been anyone from outside of North Buffalo in North Buffalo.
Right.
And I was like, "Oh, I'm from Britain and just across the pond and in here visiting some family and having a good time. How about you?" And she was so enthralled with this. And I kept it going for 5 minutes. And when I finally told her that I was just messing with her and I lived down the street, she literally gave me a titty twister and left a mark.
She was upset.
Yeah. And I was like, "What are you doing?" She's like, "You lied to me." And then that was the one and only time I ever used that. So
nice.
But Sean Spellman, if you're listening, I know you'll get a kick out of that story. So all right. Well, people are getting bored listening to that story. So why don't we get into today's podcast? So we're going to get right into In the News.
Okay.
And in the news, we got that little weird intro music. So let's listen to it. In the News, sponsored by that crappy cactus you got from Home Depot. Yeah, the one that you're never sure how much water it's supposed to take. And it's doing really, really bad. It's about to die. In the News. That's right. In the News today is sponsored by my cactus that is looking very poor on my desk here. So
things come to this office to die.
They do.
Nothing green and organic ever lives here.
It's probably the air quality in here or something.
Don't say that. I'm gonna
I at least changed the filters out a little bit. So
yeah, I appreciate that.
So the first thing we're going to be talking about in the news today is Canada's Cannabis Control Act, and I thought that this actually has some implications for America as far as kind of the way things are trending with legalizing marijuana.
Yeah.
So I'll read this to everybody listening here. Landlords may ban weed after legalization in this Canadian province because the Cannabis Control Act gives them the authority to do so. Per these new laws, those who do not own property are subject to the rules spelled out by the proprietor. So in Nova Scotia, the law permits possession of 30 grams of cannabis and a maximum of 4 marijuana plants, which sounds like a lot to me, but not for the renter, though. For many, the Cannabis Control Act will mean that they can't smoke or grow weed in the privacy of their home. According to this new legislation, landlords have to alert their tenants whether they are or are not allowed to smoke or grow weed, and the deadline to do so is April 30th, 2019. If a landlord decides to ban marijuana, the tenant has 1 month to give their 3 months notice. And this is according to the very reputable resource, hightimes.com. So I kind of picked this one out because, yes, it's in Canada, but I thought it was interesting because you're seeing marijuana being legalized more and more in the United States. Yeah. And I thought it was interesting how a province, they just said, "Hey, this is what we're going to do." Yeah. And it's the same thing. You have your state laws. You also have your province laws. So I don't know. What are your thoughts? What are your takeaways here in this news?
It reminds me of the landlord's right to allow smoking or ban smoking on their property also. Mm-hmm. Smoking cigarettes, obviously, I'm talking about.
Yeah.
So it kind of falls into that same, sort of system of it's a landlord's responsibility to highlight to the tenant what the rules are, what they're willing to allow, what they're not willing to allow. It's interesting. They built in the little caveat there at the end that, they've got a deadline to do it. They have to give a 1 month notice. Then the tenant has
3 months.
Yeah, the 3 months, 1 month to give their 3 months notice. So that probably legally gets them out of the lease.
Yep.
Right. I would assume that's why they put that into the bill.
That's kind of interesting too. If you're in a lease that you don't want, you could just say, all right, well, I know my landlord doesn't like if I smoke weed.
Right.
So I'm going to tell them that, hey, I'm going to grow weed here.
Right.
Because I know I can get out of this lease.
Yeah.
So, but
it's interesting just because you also don't usually, I can't think of a single U.S. law or bill that gives tenants that sort of loophole exit.
Yeah.
Right. Like there's nothing in place that I can think of that would be similar in the sense that it allows tenants to legally break their lease within a given time frame if they don't like something.
Yeah.
So it's interesting.
Yeah.
Canada, you know what? We're 15 minutes from the border. I sometimes catch myself saying, it's
all those hockey tournaments,
Yeah. You know what? It feels natural. I don't care what anyone says. It feels like a right thing to say sometimes, but a lot of Canadians get a lot of things right. Don't be surprised if this does well, it takes off, and you start seeing copycats because, again, I think Canada has got a lot of stuff figured out.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's move to our next news story that we have here. And a lot of people have probably heard about this one.
Yeah.
So the Scott Pruitt, who's the EPA administrator, has been evicted. So in case you haven't heard about this, he was supposed to be living in this Capitol Hill condominium, and that has become a focal point of his latest ethics controversy for 6 weeks last year while he got settled in Washington. So I kind of read that funny, but he was only supposed to be in the condo for 6 weeks. But the new EPA administrator didn't leave when his lease ended. Instead, he asked the lobbyist couple who became his disgruntled landlords to revise his lease several times, according to the two people with knowledge of the situation. The couple, Vicky and Steve Hart, became so frustrated by their lingering tenant that they eventually pushed him out and changed their locks. After trying to nudge Pruitt out of their home over the course of several months, the Harts finally told him in July that he had plans to rent his room to another tenant. So the original arrangement was that he would be there living out of a suitcase, and it just kept going and going, said one of the people with knowledge of the arrangement. The condo in which he was renting was a bedroom for $50 a night and has attracted the attention of the EPA's Inspector General, which said Thursday it was considering opening an investigation.
Yeah. No one's above eviction. That's what I get out of this.
Yeah.
So if we ran a background check on Scott Pruitt, he would have an eviction on his record now. So interesting. I mean, it sounds like almost any typical situation. Just because it's somebody in a high-ranking position in the government doesn't mean they're above tenancy laws, you know? And Vicky and Steve Hart, I don't know what the original deal was or why they made it. Well, I can make some guesses as to why it was so beneficial, you know what I mean, to give him a really good rate, obviously.
Yeah.
But clearly they realized, like, this is not a good idea.
You got to figure $50 a night, that's $1,500 a month. But for Washington, D.C., pricing is really cheap.
Yes, for sure.
And I mean, the other thing that's kind of comes to mind here, too, is you hear stories of people like don't rent to your friends.
Yeah.
So I think these were lobbyists who were obviously renting to somebody they knew through some relationship from the sounds of it, and kind of bit them in the end because they had trouble, lowering that hammer, that landlord hammer.
Yeah.
Because you just kind of like, hey, it's about time to go.
Yeah.
And you're kind of doing that kind of soft language, and you end up with issues.
You can almost see how it, transpired, right? Like Vicky tells Steve, we got to get him out of there. We're losing money on this, and let's just not renew his lease.
Yeah.
And then that doesn't work. And they're like, well, what are we going to do? We got to get this guy
Just
out of here.
change the locks.
Yeah, exactly. Which is interesting. So I wonder if it's, the Inspector General starts to scratch the surface, and maybe it comes out that maybe it was a lockout. Maybe it was an unlawful eviction. Can you imagine that?
Yeah, that'd be a plot twist, Steve.
It really would. Let's hope that Vicky and Steve Hart did everything according to the law and did it appropriately, because the last thing you want is the Inspector General looking at how your eviction went.
Yep.
I wouldn't want to be them. Bad situation to be in all around there.
Okay. Well, let's move to our third and final in the news story. So this one, we are talking about a fair market rent pilot. So What this is that recently this was enacted in New York State, where the budget creates a new affordable housing pilot program designed to help those who are homeless or at risk of losing their housing. This is according to the Daily News. So the $15 million for the fair market rent pilot plan, pushed by Assemblyman Andrew Hevesi, who's from Queens, and Senator Jeffrey Klein from the Bronx, will target 240 families who are about to become homeless or are already in the shelter system or living on the streets. So the program, the two lawmakers say, will cover 4 years, the full difference between the recipient's public assistance shelter allowance and the federally set fair market rent standard. So Hevesi and Klein called the plan the first New York State-funded rent subsidy program of its kind. Of the $15 million, $13.5 million will go to New York City to help about 200 households at risk of homelessness. An additional $1.1 million will go to upstate Monroe County, while the rest will be used to hire 2 nonprofit groups to monitor, study, and assess the pilot program, the two lawmakers said.
So this sounds like business as usual if you've lived in New York but not New York City.
Mm-hmm.
That one line in there, of the 15 million, 13.5 will go to New York City. Like,
yeah.
We pay higher taxes than most around the country. We pay everything because of New York City.
Yep.
A lot of people will admit, being in upstate New York, you just sort of pay the price of New York City. Thankfully, we don't have their housing prices. I got to imagine this is a huge issue in New York City where there's a discrepancy between what you're getting on subsidy or Section 8 and what the fair market rent value is, you know? So I get it. The numbers are kind of shocking to me too.
Yeah.
15 million is what it costs to,
but 200 households. Like I when I hear the number 15 million, I'm picturing like, we're going to have like 500 households, maybe more. I mean, I can't really do the math off the top of my head, but I'm like, that's some crazy rent that they're going to be subsidizing there.
Well, it is for 4 years too.
Yeah.
So,
very true.
But still, that's a lot of money. Where's the money coming from? You got a lot of questions there, but I guess
you and me, Steve.
Yeah, right. Okay, so is this good for landlords?
Yeah, I guess it depends. It's kind of like the Section 8 conversation, right?
I think for landlords who do rent to people with rent subsidies, this is good because they probably had to make up the difference, which is why these 240 families were about to become homeless or already living in the shelter system, right? So now if you have a subsidy that covers that gap, it's kind of like gap insurance, right? It just covers what's left over. I get it.
Have you heard about this study? I think it's in Palo Alto area where Facebook is actually testing out like having a complete community where everything is paid by Facebook.
Yes, and I can't remember the name of what they call it. It's a living wage, right?
Yeah,
it's the living wage study.
Yeah. And I think they essentially have like a school that they bought, and like it's this whole like, I don't know if there's like 1,000 families, but I think the genesis of that is they're looking at the future where maybe there's so much automation built in that there's just a living wage that they give people because there's no need for low income jobs, because of automation.
That might be a snapshot into the future right there. I mean, geez, you know what I mean? It's not hard to imagine that's exactly where the future is going to. When you and I were kids, our parents had 20-year jobs with pensions at Ford or Chevy or whatever, and those jobs, they're just not around. People don't work those jobs anymore. So, it's
just interesting to see how the government's going to be stepping in to, try and help support people and what the effect on the economies are and landlords and everybody who's, investing in property in those areas.
I obviously don't want to get political, but I look at it from this perspective. What is I
hear those eggshells breaking.
I know. What's a more worthwhile fight? Okay. If I'm a coal worker and I see my industry drying up and dying, do I double down on coal, or do I maybe try to train in something else that it may make me, give me a useful skill or a trade in some other industry or market? I think the right answer is go where the market is going. If your industry is dying, don't necessarily try to grab hold to anything that's hanging on. There's a classic story of when the auto manufacturers came out, they put a bunch of companies out of business that were making buggy whips, and the one company that saw this change coming started making steering wheels.
Yeah.
Guess what? They're the only ones that survived that huge change from buggies to automobiles.
Do you think that's where the term whip comes from? Buggy whips?
Ride my
Where,
whip.
where somebody's like, it's kind of like a rap thing where it's just like, yeah, check out my new whip. You think it's from buggy whips?
Probably not, but maybe.
All right.
Yeah.
I'll go with it. All right. Well, let's continue on. So we're going to be doing a member highlight here. And this one goes to a Mr. Joe M. Cope. So I just like this. He posted in our Rent Prep for Landlords Facebook group. He says, it's just a picture. And he says, well, it works, doesn't it? So if you're listening on the podcast, basically what somebody's done here is they have, it looks like maybe 3 P-traps on one sink. So it's quite the interesting photo here. And you can just tell they're like, well, I got these parts and we'll make this plumbing work and see how it goes.
I got to imagine they run into some clogging issues.
Yeah.
Probably, right?
Yeah. Well, maybe, there's actually 2 P-traps technically on this one because the third one's up in the air. So you have double protection.
I was just going to say,
from smelling those gases from the sewers.
I think of it as this is the sink that I want my wife to drop her earring in. I have way more chance of getting this out and finding the ring rather than it floated away and it's gone.
The one thing that I find disturbing about this more than the, shoddy plumbing, and especially because you can see there's like...
I know what you're going to say. I find it disturbing too.
There's like 5 electric toothbrushes that are all stored underneath like where the P-trap is.
Who puts their toothbrushes down with the plumbing?
Especially like nice looking electric toothbrushes.
Yeah.
Because it's like... You're going to get all that gross drippage on them. And then just the pain of having to pull your toothbrush out all the time.
Right.
I found that pretty disappointing.
I'm going to create my own narrative. This is a single guy who's really weirdly obsessed with his teeth. And these are like...
That's the Monday toothbrush? That's the Tuesday toothbrush?
Or, right. Like he's got a whole collection of toothbrushes that he's using. And it's not a family. This is all just him.
Yeah.
He's real weird about his teeth.
That could be it. That's probably the most likely scenario.
And he's into plumbing.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's move on. We are on to the landlord hotline section of the podcast. So this is a hotline that you can call. Really, it's a Google Voice number, but it sounds fancier when you call it a hotline.
Yeah.
And that number is 716-218-0363. So if you call it, you got 3 minutes to leave any kind of voicemail you want. It could be an event. It could be a question or maybe a tip of something that's working for you. So if you're listening and you want to call 716-218-0363, go ahead. And we've also got a few places on our website. And this one actually comes from a renter. And she's frustrated. And she's telling us why she's frustrated. So let's have a listen.
Mm-hmm.
Hi. My frustration is that my landlords have sold their homes and I have to leave. But that's not the major problem. The major problem is that every place I go to that's a 1-bedroom, because it is the only affordable suites that I can afford with my income, are refusing me because I have an adult child that goes to college. Now, I think this is discrimination because a lot of these suites are allowing a maximum of 2 people, but they're discriminating against me because I am not a couple. However, they're allowing couples to rent 1-bedrooms, but they're not allowing me and my daughter to rent 1 bedroom. I mean, I could make the living room my bedroom. Like, there shouldn't be an issue with how we use the suite. Anyway, that's my...
She's very sweet about it.
Yeah.
That's my complaint and frustration in these hard times of trying to find accommodation that's affordable in this high-priced market.
Okay.
I mean, my first question is, what part of Canada do you think she's from?
Definitely
got that little bit of that Manitoba accent or something.
Can I be the bad guy here? I'm going to be the bad guy.
Yeah, go for it.
I'm going to propose a scenario that has nothing to do with her familial status at all.
Okay.
And maybe it's just based on the merits of her own qualifications. Maybe her credit score is not where it should be. Maybe there's an eviction on her record. As a landlord or property manager, I don't care if it's her adult daughter or her lesbian wife or her husband. Doesn't matter. And I think most people are probably in that same boat where, regardless of what your viewpoints are or whatever, if you're bringing a tenant on, I would hope that you're not discriminating in any way. But I feel like, I don't want to sit on here and bash tenants, but I take enough calls over the years from tenants. I've seen enough complaints come in for
Steve
tenants.
gets pretty abused on a regular basis.
I really do, man. I'm like a human punching bag.
The screening floor, when there's like that person that calls in and they're just like, you can't handle them, that goes to Steve. And then,
Steve, you want to talk to this guy? He's really upset that his landlord did this, or he said that, or he feels like he's being discriminated against. I'm like, oh, all right, fine. So I've talked to these people many, many times, and I can tell you 9 out of 10 times, it has nothing to do with what they think it has to do with. It has to do with, like I said, the merits of their own qualification.
mm-hmm.
You know, not to say.
She did mention too, in these tough times, these expensive rents.
Well, okay.
So
All right.
I kind of wondered about, what's the rent to income ratio looking like, some of those things.
And here's the other piece that I think that could be easily overlooked. The way that she made it sound like this wasn't just one place. This was over and over. This was happening.
Yeah.
If one place discriminates against you, I could see it being a one-off, but for something like this, it's probably not a discrimination issue at all. I can almost guarantee that this is a qualification issue, period.
Yeah.
Her income probably doesn't meet the requirements, or like I said, credit score. Maybe she's got an eviction on her record, something that's spooking the landlord or property managers away from making a decision and saying, yeah, we'll do it.
Yeah.
If she made $100,000 a year, had very little debt, had an outstanding credit score, no evictions, are they going to deny her? Probably not.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I don't know what the rent is, but I'm just assuming, let's say that she blew the rent to income ratio out of the water and that wasn't even a question.
Yep.
Does the landlord or property manager care about her situation? Probably not.
Yeah. But I think the one of the takeaways here again is making sure that you have tenant screening criteria set up, because this is somebody who's taking the time to leave a voicemail to express their frustration, and they're saying they're being discriminated against.
Yeah.
So even if she's wrong, it doesn't mean that you might not get sucked into, some fiasco where you got to explain why. And if you can say, hey, here's my screening criteria. She didn't meet the rent to income standards. She failed my credit check. That's why. But if you don't have that, then you got to sit there and, parse through the data of why it might have happened.
And this is a great glimpse into the psyche of some tenants out there, that they insulate themselves from reality, that maybe it is something that they have on their past or in their records.
I wouldn't say that's tenants. I'd say that's people
in
general.
You're right.
Our ability to rationalize why things are or are not our fault, or I should say why, it's somebody else's fault and not our fault.
Sure.
I mean, that's a great gift we have that comes with our imaginations.
Yeah. It's like, got a blog comment recently about a tenant who was complaining that she needed 3 emotional support pets, and it wasn't fair that the landlord wouldn't allow her to have 3, and that's discrimination.
Yeah.
And again, I'm reading this thinking like, all right, get into the mind of this tenant.
Well, the one is a service dog that, it helps with this in case, I'm wheelchair bound, even though I'm not. And then the emotional support animal helps me with sleeping. And then that emotional support animal helps me with brushing my teeth.
I thought it was just
right. Isn't that what you got to do? Like,
I thought maybe the dogs didn't like to be alone when she left for work, so she needed other dogs to keep them company.
Yeah, so, emotional support for the emotional support animal.
Exactly.
Yeah,
because the emotional support animal has anxiety and needs to have another dog around.
Hey, pets do take anxiety medicine.
Exactly. So, but yeah, great point that the truth can be, very different depending on that person's point of view.
Yeah.
And in this woman's, her reality, her truth is that this has nothing to do with anything but the fact that she has an adult child living with her, which I'm willing to bet that is not the case whatsoever.
Yeah. So it's hard to say.
Yeah. Good lesson for landlords. It's not a bad idea. Even though it can be incredibly frustrating at times, it's not a bad idea to go into places like even our blog or other blogs where you might see tenants talking. Just get inside, crawl inside of their mind for a minute. It's a crazy place, but crawl inside of their minds.
Especially the ones that are willing to leave the blog comments.
Yeah,
because they're going through the effort just to, those are the same people that leave a review of like a Denny's that everybody knows isn't that good.
Yeah, exactly. But, it's not a bad idea for a landlord to, knowing that going into it, that you may not always be dealing with somebody who reasons well or whatever, and maybe that changes how you approach things.
Yeah.
So.
Well, at this point of the episode, what we're going to do is we've got a pre-recorded conversation, and this was with Frank Ramos, who is a Allstate agent. He's an insurance agent, and we're going to tee that up here. And he's going to answer some common questions that I see in the Facebook group that are related to landlord insurance policies, renter insurance policies. And this is a quick 5-minute interview, and you might pick up a few tips from him on why you might want to, reconsider your stances on renters insurance policies. So we're going to go to that, and then we'll close out the episode. So thanks for.
What do you mean? We're not going to say, we're not going to do an outro, say goodbye? We have to say that now?
I'll put it in later. This is like the weird goodbye that we do now. And then, the episode will abruptly end later.
Okay.
We're figuring this stuff out still on episode 202.
I like it. Yeah. New format.
Yeah.
But yeah, and obviously thanks to Frank for spending his time and going through those questions with us. It's definitely a good idea to figure out if you're a landlord, if you do want renter's insurance. So stay tuned and listen.
All right. We have a helpful guest here on the podcast today. His name is Frank Ramos, and he's an Allstate agent down in Manhattan. How you doing, Frank?
I'm doing terrific today. How are you?
I'm doing pretty swell. I'm glad to have you on the podcast because we get a lot of questions here on our podcast and also our Facebook group asking questions about renters insurance and how it applies to landlords. And I took some of the most frequently asked questions, and Frank's going to give us a little bit of a hand here and kind of give us some insights about renters insurance. So if you're ready, Frank, I've got some questions for you and I'll run them through.
I'm good to go.
All right. So let's start really basic. Just kind of your quick synopsis. How does renters insurance help a landlord?
Well, that's a very good question. The way it usually helps a landlord is in the event that most people are confused, and when they're renting an apartment, because the landlords do carry insurance, they think that their insurance policy, the landlord's insurance policy covers them for their contents and personal belongings, and that is far from the truth. Actually, the landlord's insurance only covers the landlord. So the renter actually has to purchase renter's insurance to make sure that their contents and their personal belongings are covered in the event of fire, theft, and it also provides liability insurance in case they do something. Go ahead.
Oh, yeah. So you were saying it also provides liability insurance in the case of if there's an accident or an injury?
Exactly.
Okay. So that leads me to my next question here. What is covered and what is not covered? So you're saying if there's a fire or maybe a pipe burst in the apartment and their stuff is ruined, then it'll be covered by their renter's insurance, not the landlord's policy. You're also brought up liability. So could that be an instance where is that a tenant falls down the stairs or, what are we talking?
Yeah, if somebody comes to your home, slips and falls, or you left something lying on the floor or an ice cube fell, which I've had those kind of claims before. Somebody gets hurt, breaks an arm, a leg, or needs immediate medical care. The liability portion of your renter's insurance will protect you in the event somebody does decide to sue or needs immediate medical care.
Okay. And is that just work let's say it's a really serious injury, like somebody's in a coma, so the medical bills are going to stack up. Would it run through your insurance on the renter's insurance policy first before it would go into any other kind of whether suing the landlord for additional medical, or is that how that would work?
Well, that's a great question. Basically, it does provide some coverage. We offer what's called guest medical, and the highest limit that we offer is $5,000 worth of coverage, and that's usually for the immediate medical care of that person if they had to go to an emergency room. Mm-hmm. It's not extensive care payment. That's usually covered under your health insurance. But we've noticed that if the injury is not that serious and we're able to cover it to at least $5,000 of their medical bill, it might defray a lawsuit, or maybe it's a personal friend and you don't want to go there and sue them. If their medical bills are paid, then usually it stops there.
Okay. This next question I think comes from because some landlords get this confused a little bit and they kind of think they're the same thing, because a landlord's insurance policy, renter's insurance policy can kind of sound the same. But how does a renter having renter's insurance differ from a landlord's umbrella policy?
Well, it differs. It's far in between, a big difference, because renters actually protects the renter itself. the person who's renting the unit. A landlord's policy will never cover the renter inside. And when you're talking about an umbrella policy, people think that an umbrella policy is all encompassing or something that covers everything, when in actuality, the only thing an umbrella policy is excess liability coverage. So if the landlord has an umbrella policy, it goes beyond the liability that they already have on their current landlord's policy. So it's excess liability. That's all a renter's is. An umbrella is. And it only covers, once again, just the landlord.
Okay.
It's good that he has it. If you got hurt because he was negligent and you were suing him, his primary liability would cover him. And if anything goes beyond what he has on his landlord's policy, then the umbrella is going to cover that landlord in the event you were suing him.
Okay, gotcha. So there's really like three different aspects that we're talking about. We're talking about renter's insurance. So that's the renter so that they have insurance on their own private stuff in case there's accident or maybe liability. Then there's the landlord's typical insurance policy where they have insurance on that home. And then above that, you can have a landlord umbrella policy that will cover you in addition to anything beyond your own insurance policy. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. And the next question I have here, this one might be a simple answer, but how does a renter make a claim? Let's say that there was a fire and their stuff has been ruined. How would they go about making a claim on that?
Usually most companies offer a 24-hour service when it comes to claims, because these things, as you're well aware, could happen any time of the day. So they're not particular just to office hours. Most companies have an 800 claims number that you would call. And the first thing you would have to do is notify the insurance company. And if you have your policy handy at the time, it really helps everything. And in most cases, they might be able to look you up with the name and the address and your phone number. And then once you call in, they would start the process of setting up a claim. They will assign a claim number. And usually within 24 to 48 hours, a claims adjuster would reach out to you. One of the things that's very helpful in doing a claim, and when you do have a claim, is to have some kind of personal inventory of your personal belongings, either by taking photos or doing an inventory list. Those things are kind of helpful because when there is a fire and there's total devastation and destruction in your unit, you will forget half of the things that you actually had in there and owned. Mm-hmm. And you always have to give justification to a claims adjuster, the reason why to write a check. So if you have some kind of inventory of the things that you had, it makes the whole claim process a lot easier. Instead of you remembering 2 or 3 months later, yep, I forgot this item, I forgot that item.
Yeah, that's interesting because we're always telling landlords to document everything and throughout their process, but it's a good idea for renters to document what they have if they're going to have a renter's insurance policy. And
right.
Just out of curiosity, what do you find typically renter's insurance policies run in your area in Manhattan? I'm sure you insure people outside of Manhattan too, but yeah. What do you typically find?
Well, a basic policy could run you about $150 a year, but it's all going to depend on the coverages and what you get. A well-designed renter's policy should run maybe $250, $350 a year.
Okay.
Very small price to pay for replacing whatever took you years to accumulate in contents and personal belongings. Could be wiped out in 1 second.
Yeah. No, that's a great point. All right. The last question I have for you, and it kind of piggybacks on the idea of, you could have everything wiped out in just one instant. So let's say, in the unfortunate situation that there is a fire or a pipe burst, which leads to, major water damage in an apartment. A common question we get from landlords and renters is they want to know if the renter's insurance covers a hotel for them to stay in while the remodeling is being done or they're looking for a new place to live.
That's an excellent question because most people don't realize. Most companies do offer what's called either loss of use, or we call it at Allstate additional living expenses. And that's what basically covers you if your unit becomes uninhabitable from a covered peril. So a fire and a pipe bursting would be a covered peril. So if any one of those two situations will cost you to have to move away or move out because of smoke damage or the water that was sprayed, yes, you're entitled to stay in a hotel room. And what separates us from most of the competition is that we have an unlimited benefit for a time period of 12 months.
Oh, wow.
But most companies do put a percentage based on your contents, either 30 or 40%. So that's one of the advantages that we have in the marketplace. And a lot of people, just for that benefit alone, end up choosing us.
Oh, yeah, that's definitely good to know. And if somebody, so the renter's going through the claim process, they're going to need, are they reimbursed after the fact, or does your company actually pay for that hotel directly? How does that work?
Yeah, when it comes to the claim, that's usually handled by the claims adjuster. We have a lot of agreements with a lot of major hotels here in the area. So usually we'll give you a list of hotels in the area that participate with Allstate, so it would be more seamless. But you could pick the nearest hotel near you at any particular point in time. You know, I mean, you're distraught, you lost everything. We're not going to have you pick and choose. We're going to have you pick and choose something nearby that you're going to feel comfortable and that's local in the area. But some people do ask us, do we have any relationships with any local hotels? And we surely do.
Okay, cool. Hey, Frank, I want to say thank you for being on the podcast here today. And if anyone's listening and happens to be from the Manhattan area, you should check Frank Ramos out and his Allstate agency. And yeah, thank you for the insights. I know these are things that, a lot of landlords and renters get tripped up on. So I appreciate you kind of setting the ship straight here.
It's my pleasure. I think this is very important that if you rent, there is no reason why you should not have insurance. Every homeowner, every landlord is required to have it, and they have it. Every renter, even though they're not required, I suggest should have it because of the simple fact that I told you. It takes years for them to accumulate their possessions, and it's horrible when they lose it in a few minutes and have to rebuild.
Yeah, that's well said. All right, thanks for being on the podcast today, Frank. We really appreciate your time.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
All right, take care.
Have a good day. Bye-bye.